Welcome back to Licks of the Beast. I'm Nico Falco, and today we're going to break down Jake Lee's masterpiece of a solo from Killer of Giants. So this isn't a particularly difficult solo in terms of fast legato, alternate pick runs, or elaborate sweep picking, but it really challenges you on your control of the guitar. Because you're switching from picking to sliding tapped octave shapes or to parallel octave pull-offs and back, all while avoiding string noise and being careful not to bend the notes out of pitch. And even the bends at the end are a bit tricky, especially that last one, because you have to bend and release multiple times in a combination of 1.5 steps, whole steps, and half steps. Again, this is a different kind of difficulty. Performing this solo smoothly and with the right feel requires a lot more finesse and control than your average metal solo, so it's well worth taking the time to learn and study this one. Jake Lee himself once described Killer of Giants as maybe his proudest achievement, specifically because of the way the song flows from one section to the next. It's arguably one of Ozzy's most impactful songs both lyrically and musically, and Jake's guitar solo manages to add even more drama, emotion, and impact to an already powerful piece of music. And this just feels like the perfect time to revisit it because this year marks the 40th anniversary of The Ultimate Sin. Now, even though the album is often remembered for its big 80s production and maybe more commercial edge, it also captures Jake at a really interesting point in his playing. On Bark at the Moon, Jake had already made a huge statement, despite having stepped into an impossibly difficult position. But on The Ultimate Sin, you can hear him actually stretching out, and you get the sense of a player whose own identity was now coming through even more clearly. And the guitar solo he played on Killer of Giants is a standout moment from an album full of truly magnificent guitar playing. So let's take a closer look at what Jake is doing here and why this solo still hits so hard 40 years later. Now, before we get into it, I want to mention that this video is sponsored by me. More specifically, by my Adrian Smith guitar course, The H Factor. Now, you guys know how much Adrian's playing has shaped the way I think about metal guitar, and one thing I've noticed from learning his parts and from teaching them is that you could play all the right notes and still feel like something is missing. The H Factor is essentially my answer to the questions that I keep getting on the channel and in private lessons. It covers all the essentials: tone, technique, scale patterns, phrasing, and the little details that make his playing so recognizable. And at the end, it all comes together in a full solo so that you're not just copying the licks, but you're learning how to actually use this stuff in your own playing. It's the kind of instruction I wish I had back when I was learning all this stuff. So if you want a better understanding of Adrian's playing and the key to make the licks and riffs sound and feel right, check out The H Factor. Okay, so like Jake on the original recording, I'm tuned down a half step, but I'll be referring to the notes based on where they're played on the guitar, even though the actual pitches will be half a step lower. And as always, we'll start with just a quick look at the accompaniment so that we're analyzing Jake's licks and phrases in context. It's a simple 3-chord pattern that repeats 6 times. So it's the classic 6-7-1 in minor key, so G, A, and B. And that B, there's one track that's actually a B suspended second. Now, the only slight change is that for just the 3rd time, they'll hit the 5 chord, the F sharp, instead of the B. Yeah, and that other guitar is playing the Alex Lifeson chord there. Now, it's a very slight but very significant change because holding that 5 chord for 2 bars acts as a wind-up for the next part to make it much more impactful. See what I mean? So yeah, it's a simple accompaniment, but it's exactly what this section of the song needed for a great melodic solo before the intense interlude that follows with that dissonant flat 5. Okay, so now let's get to Jake's solo. So it's mostly based on the B natural minor scale, also known as the Aeolian mode. And he's not really sticking to box positions all that much. Instead, he's using the basic Aeolian shapes to move more fluidly across the neck. The opening lick starts with this double stop motif. And then he repeats it a fourth lower. And then he continues with a diatonically descending line in a triplet pattern. So this opening phrase works almost like a two-part setup followed by the payoff. So first he states the motif, then he repeats it a fourth lower, and then the descending line completes the phrase. It's a very vocal kind of melody, and this is the kind of thing that sets a master soloist like Jakey Lee apart. So from there, he goes right into this craziness with the double octaves. Let me do that a little slower. Okay, so that's a really cool thing to do, but why do it at all? Well, let's look at it from a bit of a practical standpoint, because he could have articulated this a number of ways, all of them much easier to play than what he's doing. So he could have done it like, right? Something like that. But why then do it with the taps and the slides? I think it just sounds a bit smoother this way, once you've got it down, of course. And let's face it looks real badass. And, I'm only speculating here, but if you're Jakey Lee in 1986, there's still that Randy Rhoads shadow looming over you. There's Yngwie and Eddie Satriani Lynch and Paul Gilbert just, making everybody crazy. Now, you need to pull something really cool out of your hat. This is still cool now, 40 years later, so just imagine how it looked way back then. Okay, so. And then he continues that phrase with an octave melody reminiscent of Wes Montgomery. Back in the day, whenever I'd read an article or an interview where they mentioned a part like this with octaves, it was always reminiscent of Wes Montgomery. And I'd always think but does nobody else play octaves? I always felt it was, musicians just trying to sound all erudite. I didn't really believe these guys were really sitting at home studying all these jazz records, but anyway, I digress. So this really is a wicked melody, and it sounds really big with the octaves. You could get a better idea of what kind of phrase this is and what purpose it serves if you play it as a more traditional, straight-ahead metal, single note thing in box position with palm muting, right? Something like this. Right? So it's like a transition phrase, and what's really clever about it is the use of multiple fourths in there. It's a great way to give this kind of line a wider span, and played as octaves, it just sounds really big. Now, the next phrase references the melody of the pre-chorus somewhat, and there's another bit of craziness here as well. So he starts by playing the melody as a descending legato run on the G string. And then he doubles down on it, this time by adding the same line played an octave higher on the E string with the picking hand. That is wicked cool. Now he ends this idea with an other octave melody. Now this one is more straightforward. He advances diatonically by pivoting off a lower interval and going up 2 steps. And that little tapped octave trill just adds a nice touch of badass. And by the way, if you're wondering what is this guitar that I'm playing, this is an early 90s model Lado Hawk series. It's one of the more budget-friendly import models that they had back then. It was made in Korea to Joe Lado's specs, and he of course had gone to the factory to make sure that they were making the guitars as he wanted them to be. They weren't exactly cheap either. I believe these were selling for around 700 US dollars at the time. And that's because they're actually pretty good guitars. Now, this one plays great. The neck has a comfortable shape. The fingerboard is really nice. And I love the Lado inlay at the 12th fret. Now, these are mother of pearl, so they didn't cheap out on the details. I picked this up for $300 here in Toronto, and all I did so far is I changed the stock 6-point tremolo bridge to a Vega Trem VT1, and that instantly made the guitar feel so much smoother and more comfortable. I really love this trem. It's incredibly smooth and expressive, and I also have one on my black Charvel Model 1. At this point, he reiterates that octave melody from the second phrase, but he moves it up a step diatonically, so instead of F sharp to G and G to A, he plays G to A and A to B. But the second set of octaves are still the same as the first time, so both stops are now on a minor seventh interval. So there's an element of thematic development and also a sense of building tension, which starts to give the feeling that we're moving towards the climax. He continues with this little question and answer phrase where the question is the B octave, and then the answer is a 3-note melody. So first, and then. So here again, this is the kind of thing that a singer might do, and that's why this solo sticks in your head the way that it does. There's a natural logic to the melodies. It's not just a bunch of licks. So whenever you hear people saying things like, yeah, Jake just went for it, he played by feel. It's like, yeah, except you're forgetting how many years that guy spent listening to songs, dissecting them, and learning what made them work. Playing by feel from nothing is not the same as playing by feel after you've developed a high level of musicality. It's really important to understand this sort of thing. Okay, so we're at the final part of the solo, and here he does a similar thing to the previous lick, where he plays a melody and then he repeats it just a step higher. So you get a sense of forward momentum. So it goes like this. And he comes out of that with these two bend and release things on the E string. The articulation and the choice of notes, ending on the 5th F sharp over the B chord, clearly teases the payoff. And that comes in the form of this big final series of bend and release at the 19th fret. Now that last part is pretty tricky because you only pick the one note on the B, then bend 1.5 steps to D, release just a bit more than a half step, bend another half step to C sharp, and then you have to release slowly back to B, and you hold that note for almost 2 bars with a decent amount of vibrato. So you're essentially creating a melody from bending and releasing one fretted note. And it can take a little practice to get this right. So if this doesn't come naturally to you, I recommend you resist the urge to just go crazy, because you can already do that. Learning a solo that you really like could be a great opportunity to work on an aspect of your technique that might still need a little work, so take the time to get it right. Unfortunately, there isn't very much live footage of Jake playing this song available online, and as I understand it, it's due to ongoing legal disputes between the songwriters, which included Jake Healy and Bob Daisley, and Ozzy's management regarding the ownership of the publishing and the royalties. Now, the entire Ultimate Sin album has been removed from Ozzy's discography on streaming platforms like Spotify and YouTube Music. I think that's a real shame to bury an album that, while far from perfect, still contains at least a handful of really great songs and a ton of killer guitar riffs and great solos from Jake E. Lee that young players could be learning from. Now, that being said, I did find 2 live recordings from 1986. One shot in Montreal, and I'm telling you, all these bootleg videos from the 80s metal shows were shot in Montreal, and another one was shot in New York. I'm going to include links to both videos in the description because, it's one thing to watch me demonstrate and explain the solo, but to watch Jake play it in front of a rabid arena crowd, just a short time after he had originally recorded it, there's an entirely different element to that I can't possibly give you. So I think you should really take the time to check out those videos and then come back to this one to learn it. As always, thank you so much for watching. Cheers.